There have been dozens of film and television adaptations of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol since its original publishing in 1843. Growing up, I remember seeing Mickey's Christmas Carol first, and for years, it became tradition that I'd go see A Christmas Carol live on stage. Of all the Christmas traditions, at least for me, A Christmas Carol feels the most like Christmas. And when Disney opted to turn it into a film with Jim Henson's Muppets in 1992, they hoped it would revive the Muppet characters for a future generation. While it wasn't the Muppets' biggest hit, especially since it went up against Home Alone 2 during that holiday season, it has stood the test of time as a perennial favorite. My name's Josh Taylor, this is Modern Mouse, and today I want to talk about why the Muppet Christmas Carol was made, how true it is to the original version and Victorian England, and why, in my opinion, I think the Muppet Christmas Carol is the best version of A Christmas Carol ever made. If you don't know the story of A Christmas Carol, it seems unfathomable that somebody wouldn't, but I'm sure there's somebody out there. It's the story of Ebenezer Scrooge, a ruthless businessman and banker who, on Christmas Eve, is visited by several ghosts. The first being his old partner, Jacob Marley, who warns him that his ruthless and greedy ways will have him wearing chains in the afterlife. The following three ghosts show Scrooge his younger self, the current lives of those he knows, like his nephew Fred and his employee Bob Cratchit, as well as their families and friends. And of course we see Christmases of the future that see his wealth and success mocked rather than celebrated, and the son of Bob Cratchit dead, because the Cratchit family couldn't get the help and support that they needed financially. The novel was published in 1843, and it was an immediate hit. Critics praised the novel, and as years went on, it grew in popularity outside of England. In fact, the impact from A Christmas Carol changed Christmas as a holiday and how we celebrate it, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Let's fast forward to the 1990s. Jim Henson had struck a deal with Disney and was going to sell his entire production company to them, working as a creative under the Disney umbrella. Unfortunately, that didn't come to pass since he would die in May of 1990. And at that point, everything at Jim Henson Productions came to a halt. The theme park additions, the movies, the TV shows, everything stopped without Jim Henson. But when his son Brian took over, he was given the opportunity to make A Christmas Carol into a made-for-TV film for ABC, the first production after Jim Henson's death. The story went through lots of rewrites. Originally, classic Muppets characters were set to play the ghosts, and the film was supposed to be way more silly. The story was rewritten to be darker, giving the ghost roles to new, unseen characters, with the ghost of Jacob Marley split between the two grouchy old Waldorf and Statler characters. Honestly, the Ghost of Christmas Past and the Ghost of Christmases Yet to Come are both horrifying to look at, and add much more to the story than any of the regular Muppet cast ever could. When Michael Caine signed on to play Ebenezer Scrooge, he did so only if he could play the role straight.
Bob Cratchit?
Yes, Mr. Scrooge?
Who is this?
Previous Muppets films saw antics extend out to the human guests, who were in on the jokes. Caine wasn't interested in that. He wanted to play Ebenezer Scrooge as if this film was a serious dramatic role, just as it had been in previous stage and screen iterations. In playing the part this way, he set a new precedence for what Muppet live-action films could be. Previous films were filled with classic Muppets charm and gags, but he brought a dreary and bleak tone to the film, one that I think Charles Dickens himself would be fond of seeing. Charles Dickens was famous during the time in which he lived, and is still regarded as one of the most famous and well-known authors in classic literature. In fact, I'd assume if you went around and asked people to name classic authors, they could probably name Charles Dickens. What you may not know is that long before he was a novelist, he was actually a journalist in 19th century Victorian England. and he wrote about the politics and social issues of that time period. It was the Industrial Revolution, and capitalism became a major issue for England. Lots of money was coming into the country, and while there was growth in the middle class, the rich also got much richer. A growth in population also left many homeless and without jobs. Children were put to work, and the average work schedule was absolutely grueling. This was long before unionization, so many people worked long hours with few days off. Bank holidays didn't exist, so workers had very few leisure days to look forward to. And as the upper class became richer, the middle class started to become the lower class. Land and property ownership went to the rich, who would then charge rent to those with small salaries as a way to keep the working class working. Dickens was also a Christian, but spoke out against the Catholic and evangelical church of the time. He was upset with the ways the church restricted its followers from having leisure time and ultimately enjoying life, asking them instead to devote themselves to work and prayer. Dickens wrote about these things in his fiction as well. A Christmas Carol is really a story about a man who chooses greed over humanity and work over love. He chose to write about Christmas not as a way to praise Jesus, but as a way to praise human kindness. He wrote A Christmas Carol as a way to showcase his and many other people's frustration with the upper class in hopes that the people in power would change. It's a story that's dreary and bleak, but it's also one with lightheartedness and charm. Rather than focusing on the Christian side of Christmas, he wrote a story about a holiday that stripped society of social class and filled it instead with love and good deeds. At that time, Christmas was beginning to grow as a holiday. It's weird to think about a time where Christmas didn't have lots of decorations and gifts and stories about flying reindeer, but in Victorian England, they had barely begun adopting the idea of a Christmas tree. Dickens actually influenced the larger population to gather, not to worship or pray, but to dance and play games and eat together. His version of the holiday is based on sharing, gift giving, and charity. These are all ideas that would influence Christmas around the world, and those traditions would stick for generations to come. But getting back to the Muppets, this production of A Christmas Carol would actually honor its original writer. You can see in the film that the backdrops of London are cold and harsh. The buildings and streets lack color. We see the inside of Fred's home, and as somebody who has some wealth, his home is colorful, but Bob Cratchit's home and the office of Scrooge, who's pretty stingy, are bare and just as harsh as the outdoor sets. And despite all this dreariness, the characters of the film find reasons to sing and dance and laugh. Michael Caine's portrayal of Ebenezer Scrooge is on another level. We see him as he transforms and understands the meaning of life. He's unapproachable to begin with, and it's easy to see why people would hate and fear him. But there are genuine moments of care and compassion that come from his performance as he spends his Christmas evening with ghosts. What the Muppets have always been known for comes bleeding through in this film. The gags are all there. Gonzo and Rizzo narrating the film gives levity to scenes that would be too far serious and dark for a younger audience. Kermit brings his positivity and charm to Bob Cratchit, a character that's been played by so many people, and it seems silly to state that a puppet plays it best, but Steve Whitmire's version of Kermit and the love that character exudes balances the dystopian world of Michael Caine's performance in ways that I don't think many performers could. Of course, it wouldn't be a Muppet movie without great music, and if I can just go off on a tangent here for a moment. The folks at Disney and I Am 8-Bit sent me this vinyl remastering of the soundtrack. The artwork and the actual vinyl on this are absolutely beautiful, and it sounds fantastic. This vinyl features the original score and songs by Paul Williams and Miles Goodman. Williams originally wrote Rainbow Connection, probably the most famous of the Muppet songs, and he, along with Goodman, delivered a ton of wonderful songs in A Muppet Christmas Carol. It Feels Like Christmas and Thankful Heart are genuinely joyous songs that are fitting for any Christmas celebration, as well as my personal favorite song from the film, One More Sleep Till Christmas. The composition also includes wonderful motifs for Scrooge and several other characters. I actually go as far to say that this is the best soundtrack to any Muppets movie, because not only does it have authentic and genuine songs that feel very specific to the Muppets, but it actually feels like a really great Christmas album. One that you would want to play during the holidays, at a party, or when you're just wrapping presents by yourself. These are songs about joy and spreading love, and in most Muppet movies, the songs feel cute and silly, but there's something more to this soundtrack. And I think that the work that Williams and Goodman put into this movie goes a bit unnoticed. So this is me giving some praise and love to the soundtrack of The Muppet Christmas Carol. And if you want to pick up one of these vinyl records for yourself, you can. I'll leave a link in the description down below. Just click on it and go buy it for yourself. And thank you to I Am 8-Bit for selling these and for sending me one. I really appreciate that. Outside of the music though, some of my favorite parts of The Muppet Christmas Carol are small character moments. Like when Scrooge meets the ghost of Christmas Present for the first time, and they have an exchange that leaves Michael Caine chuckling.
1800. Imagine the grocery bills.
Or the shot of Kermit standing in the middle of the street looking out onto a quiet and peaceful London at night. Or the moment that Animal gets bored of playing slow music at Fozziwig's party and just goes crazy on the drums. Or the sweet moment where Scrooge sees Belle and all the noise from the party begins to fade as they stare at each other lovingly. There are so many wonderful scenes in this hour-and-a-half film that it just flies by so quickly. Overall, The Muppet Christmas Carol is a celebration of the original novel, and I think that's why, in my opinion, it makes it the greatest adaptation of that story. It's not only joyful and full of love, but it's also scary and sad. It's a film that shows how greed and classism can turn someone so sour, and that a population built on those ideas will ultimately suffer. The Muppets have never been afraid to show the good and bad in humanity. It wasn't that long ago that people were discussing gender because of an episode of Muppet Babies. The first ever episode of The Muppet Show back in the 1970s was titled Sex and Violence. It's not a stretch to think that the Muppets wouldn't be afraid to show what happens when capitalism loses control and individual greed becomes more important than loving your community. Also, because it's the Muppets, it's easy to watch and to laugh and to sing along. The Muppets turned something dark and dreary into something full of hope and honesty. That's the thing that Charles Dickens was trying to do when he wrote A Christmas Carol. He made a story that people could truly enjoy, but also take away serious value. It's a story about how work and money don't mean anything unless you have friends and family and love. And a society that's built on those ideas instead are people who live infinitely richer lives. Thanks for watching this video. I had a blast researching and writing this video. If you are interested in more Christmas videos, I definitely have more of those. You can see the entire playlist of all of my holiday stuff right here. And be sure, if you're interested in buying the vinyl, you can. Check out the description down below. And in the meantime, my friends, thank you for watching. And as always, keep moving forward.